start again. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Neha Kumar, pronouns she, her, and I'm here as SIGCHI president and also a resident of the state of Georgia in the US and faculty at Georgia Tech. And I'm here with colleagues on the SIGCHI Executive Committee, the CHI Steering Committee, the CHI Executive Team for 22, and many other volunteers from our community. And thank you all for being here. Because we have less than an hour, I'll ask you all to briefly introduce yourself over chat if you'd like. So just your name, maybe pronouns, maybe institution, whatever you would like. So I'll be moderating over the next hour and we're here to talk about CHI 22 and to talk about bigger questions that impact us all as a SIGCHI community. We're here to make space for more transparency, clear and effective communication, and honoring diverse perspectives that make up our community. We're here because we care about our conferences, but also because we care about people first. The SIGCHI EC has been doing various virtual community-facing discussions since last summer, starting with our Ask Me Anything sessions last year, and then our equity talks earlier this year. And as we kick off our next set of conversations on topics that impact the community, we felt that a conversation about CHI 22 was an important one to have for giving us all just an opportunity to be better heard, better understood individually and collectively. So I'm going to start by thanking our CHI General Chairs and their team of many, many volunteers for all of their work, acknowledging that we're pulling them away from this work as they take this time to engage with us and with the community. And they will go over their plans, their survey findings for about 15 to 20 minutes, and we will then open up the floor for discussion. First, I'm going to go over the code of conduct that we've been using for our monthly open meetings, and I'll just summarize some important points for you. So bear with me while I do that, and feel free to drop your introductions in the chat while I go over it. So first, please turn on your microphone only when asked to speak by one of us. Otherwise, raise your hand. We encourage adding your pronouns after your name in Zoom if you're comfortable doing so. Also, when you speak, you're encouraged to begin by stating your name, your pronoun, and institution to accommodate those who cannot visually identify you. We also encourage using your camera for ease of comprehension and lip reading. Please remember to keep your comments concise. We have limited time and many voices to listen to. If you have questions, concerns, suggestions that you would like to mention privately, you can reach out to one of us on chat as well. If instead you would like to be completely anonymous, then please use the Slido link to express yourself, especially since we are recording this hour, so keep that in mind, and chats are also saved. Be careful not to share content about people or situations that is sensitive in nature to people of various genders, abilities, ethnicities, religious affiliations, cultures, ages, education levels, economic or political grouping, or that could be interpreted as offensive or unnecessary to communicating your main message. Should any issues or violations arise, then I will remind you and everyone of the code of conduct. In the case of harassment, discrimination, or problematic content, we will publicly acknowledge the issue, name the violation, and use our judgment on what to do next, be that providing a warning or removing the offending party. We encourage constructive criticism and critique, but this is a supportive space. So be hard on systems and soft on people. Be patient, be kind, be supportive, avoid personal attacks, and help us collectively find ways to address any systemic issues to be overcome. People's lived experiences are not up for debate. Their ideas, policies, and suggestions are. The lines between these two are not always clear, so give each other the benefit of the doubt. Grace, sensitivity, and validation go a long way toward creating community. Access to education about needs around identity, social justice, and cultural sensitivities are not equal. Not everyone has access to the bodies, knowledge, or communities that you do. There are differences between us and material limits that must be respected, even if disagreed with. There may be times when identifying words or phrases are insensitive or just don't feel right to you. If these issues come up, take each other in good faith. And if you have the capacity then correct the individual. Help in refocusing on the topic of the moment. Finally, if you misgender, incorrectly pronounce, or unintentionally discriminate against someone, identify the issue, begin your comment again with the error corrected, and continue. Feel free to leave the talk, move around, or take a moment to yourself whenever needed. In the event of harassment or discrimination, directly message me, that is the moderator, and they are equipped. We are equipped to take appropriate action. On Friday, when we did this session, Kale Passmore was here as AC Equity. I think it is just too early for Kale, but I did want to acknowledge that it was a great help to have them on Friday to help moderate. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. There are two important links. One is the link to the code of conduct, and the other is the link to the Slido. And we're going to start with the general chairs first presenting their slides. So I think that would be you, Cliff. Would you like to share your screen now?
Sure, you betcha.
And please go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Let me see if I can find the right screen a second. Hold on. I am one of those people who has too many tabs open. Hi, everybody. My name is Cliff Lampy. I'm he, him at the University of Michigan. I'm one of the general co-chairs for CHI 2022, and I'd like to also wave and say hi to Simone Barbosa, who's my excellent general co-chair. I'd also like to quickly recognize Carolina Per, who's one of our technical program chairs, and Kata Spiel, who's one of our equity and justice chairs, equity, justice, and access chairs. I also, I see a couple of other of our volunteers, especially Koji Otani, who's one of our papers chairs in the chat. So I'd like to say hi to him as well. So thanks to the executive committee and the steering committee for putting this together. It's a great opportunity to kind of have a conversation and to share what we've been doing and thinking. So the big question I think that comes up is, should we continue to plan to have an in-person option for CHI 2022? As part of that, we've always been planning an online option for CHI 2022. I think since the beginning of our planning, that's never been off the table. So the big question then becomes, what about the in-person option? Overall questions and concerns about the in-person option. We're looking at these general concerns, and I'm sure there are more. I'm sure this is not a complete list, but people who are immunocompromised would be discriminated against since they will not have the same freedom to attend choice that others do. People who are from regions with unequal access to vaccines will be discriminated against. People who are from regions affected by travel bans will be discriminated against. People in the region who we are going to are put at more risk because of us, because we travel in, and we might be increasing their risk. And volunteers organizing the conference will suffer because they have to do twice the work, which is something I care a lot about and think about pretty often. So our persistent rubric for consideration about this question has been 3 items. One is safety. I'll go into each of these a little bit more. So with appropriate precautions, is it possible to mitigate risk to participants? Equity, does the inequity of attendance reach a threshold that we can't bear? And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. And then financial responsibility. Given we already have contract commitments, what's the best way to steward the financial health of the conference? So how we have sought data so far, we've been doing a bunch of stuff. We've had regular conversations with the steering committee and the executive committee, seeking their expert wisdom and guidance. We've been in contact with the New Orleans Convention Center. They have a lot of experts. They're closely in touch with the New Orleans Health Department and have been hosting a lot of meetings already. We've been tracking US government, especially federal and city health data to see what's happening with the infection rates, especially with the Delta variant. We've been going to webinars with conference management experts. So as you can imagine, there's an entire industry of people who are organizing, who specialize in organizing conferences. And our friends at Executive Events turned me on to a bunch of really good resources there. And then we did a survey of 950 community members that people were really wholehearted about sharing their thoughts and feelings with us, and that was great. So starting with that survey, we can share some of the results. So our big question was Q3, all things considered, do you personally believe the CHI 2022 conference should include an in-person event? The mean score for that was a 63 and the median was a 70, where 0 was absolutely not and 100 was absolute yes. Those numbers hide a little bit of variance. So Simone ginned up the really beautiful charts we see next, which is, so you can see that this is kind of a dipolar distribution with polls at both absolutely not and absolutely yes, with lots of responses in between as well. So, you know, a little uncertainty in the community with a couple of groups that really feel strongly one way or the other. We thought it would be reasonable that maybe people who didn't feel like, so North Americans, for instance, because they could more easily get to New Orleans, might feel differently than other folks, especially in Europe. But you can see here that hypothesis didn't really bear out. We had thought because of recent travel bans from travel from Europe, people might feel differently, but that group was actually fairly strongly in favor. But you do see a lot of variance here overall, right? These are still pretty big ranges. We'd also thought that maybe we had asked a question about whether you plan to attend the conference or not. We thought maybe that would affect people's vision, whether they wanted to be at the online conference or the in-person conference. And there we found that people were mostly, yes, that did indeed shape whether you thought there should be an in-person conference or not, as you might imagine. But there's still a lot of variance, as you can see from these scatter plots and how people thought about this. And we also did ask which version of CHI would you be more likely to attend, the in-person, the online. I have to say this chart is, for me, the best news of the survey, because it just shows that people are interested in both options for attending the conference, and that lots and lots of people are going to be really willing to attend both of these channels that we're planning to put in place. So I mentioned earlier that we had these 3 criteria that we consider when we were looking at things. One being safety. So a resource that I've been turning to more and more lately is a company called Epistemics. I misspelled that there. It's Epistemics. They track data for conferences and large scale events all over North America. So they've been, for the past few months, releasing regular reports about, like, you know, what our infection rates look like, what do infection rates look like when you have different health and safety protocols in place, how do we think about these things? And their take is, you know, in general, bringing people to a conference is going to be more risky than having them stay at home and quarantine or you know, follow their regular safety procedures. But it's not a remarkable increase over people going to work and things like that. So, you know, we're keeping track of this and looking at different data rates or different infection rates and everything. But according to the data we've seen come out of big conferences so far, we're looking at that. We've been tracking other events that we think are like ours too. So lots of conferences are starting hybrid events right now. ICMI, I think, is this week. High Play is right now. We've been looking at Rexus, which just occurred recently. Supercomputing is coming up in a week, I think, and they're a good conference comparison because they're a conference that's quite a bit larger than ours for their in-person component. So tracking all of this and seeing what happens with those conferences. Do we see a bump after that? It's hard to track sometimes, but Epistemics has done a pretty good job of that. So we're trying to follow the data. Our take from following the data is that with reasonable safety precautions, even large events do not seem to drastically increase infection rates. And what that actual increased risk looks like, of course, depends on how you measure and everything, as we know as scientists. The CDC in the United States is not currently recommending canceling large in-person events. And the City of New Orleans Health Department is currently mandating vaccination and masking for in-person events, along with a couple of other regulations that affect more of the event space holders and everything. So that's good news, because with the Epistemics data shows that it's those reasonable health precautions like vaccination and masking for in-person events that really makes a difference. Now, mandating vaccination has a global implication because not everybody has the same vaccine from the same place. That's, again, part of that inequity issue and something we think about. Anybody traveling to the United States right now has to be vaccinated. So we'll accept any vaccination that gets you into the US is what we're thinking for the conference. and we're working with the ACM to figure out exactly what that will look like. And then we've been working with our accessibility chairs to make sure that if you, for instance, have a reasonable medical reason to not be vaccinated, that we have a process by which you can show that without outing yourself or having to face undue harm. Equity is really one of the big key factors here. So clearly the in-person option increases inequity for some members, right? For folks who are disabled or immunocompromised or live with somebody who's immunocompromised. I myself live with a kid who can't be vaccinated yet. The in-person option increases that inequity. So it's a matter of discussion, given CHI has always had some level of inequity, how much inequity we will accommodate. And I'm here to listen to what the community thinks about that, or how to mitigate that inequity. I think in general, we've been thinking about this, in the basis of that inequity is this idea that the in-person conference is better than the online conference. And I think for the most part, that has still been true in most cases. What we're doing in our mode from the beginning has been to kind of have my team's sick of me hearing this, with this no second class experiences model, where for us, the goal has been to bring the online version of the conference forward and to renew our commitment to really crack that online conference experience. We want to really try to make that as meaningful as possible. So if you are attending the conference online, and there's lots of reasons people are going to do that. It's going to be sometimes for cost, sometimes it's going to be reasons for environmental sustainability. We also think that CHI is going to be hybrid, like having mixed offline and online modes into the future because of some of those concerns about equity, cost, travel, hassle, all that stuff. So with the future of CHI being hybrid, we have a strong commitment to start to figure that out. Our sense is we're not going to nail it first time. I'm sure we're going to make some mistakes, but it's a conversation for the CHI steering committee to think about, how do we keep iterating on this, right? What's our design iterations to make sure that we are bringing that online experience forward, to keep reducing that equity and to keep making that online experience really the thing that's valuable for our members. I've been thinking about the concern about the community too. They're very excited and enthused to have us come to New Orleans. When I mentioned that there was a concern about them, capitalism being such as it is, they're like, oh no, please do come and bring your money. And a lot of that is because, even outside of what our contracts are, the city, we bring about a $2 million amount of money to the conference in terms of hotel rooms and eating out and tchotchkes and everything, and going to clubs and whatever else we do while we're at CHI. So that's a pretty good boost for the economy and something they like to see. So it doesn't preclude the danger that we also provide, but it's just another consideration. In terms of financial responsibility, so we are currently committed between $1.2 and $2 million, depending on how you count it and which contracts get triggered when. In the past, when we've looked at CHI 2020 and 2021, there are often what are called force majeure exemptions in our contracts, which are clauses you can put in place such that if there is kind of a natural disaster or act of God kind of thing, that you can get some of that money back. And so we've been lucky in the past with a lot of our conferences over the past 2 years to be able to enact those force majeure clauses. Talking to the ACM, they don't think there's any chance that any of the current situation or context will trigger those force majeure clauses that would now allow us to get our money back. Contracts for conference, our online conference management system is already in place. We're not quite ready to announce that publicly because ACM is still kind of negotiating the final contract. But we've already made a deal with them in principle, and that money is already allocated, such as it is. In moving forward, we do incur more costs, right? So it is possible that our exposure gets even worse. So, and most of those costs are related to food and to audio visual and stuff like that. So in the open-ended and in some of the online conversations, we've seen a couple of alternative strategies that probably won't work. I just want to address those right up front. One is to move the conference to a more compliant location. So New Orleans is in Louisiana in the United States, which is a southern state and heavily Republican. And like a lot of those states, hasn't been as compliant with vaccination rates as we would like to see. So there was some talk of moving it to like California. But I just want to note that the CHI conference locations are usually contracted 4 to 5 years in advance, well before any of the volunteers are put in place. So it would be really, really difficult to find a place. And even if that were possible, that wouldn't preclude us from losing all of the commitments we've made to New Orleans as well. This one, actually, the last meeting we had about this softened me on this one a little bit. So the idea of this would be to focus on regional meetings rather than a big single meeting. So the idea here for me, and the reason I've been, I was hesitant initially, was to meet the size requirement, you would need 40 to 50 such meetings. As official ACM conferences, each would need to be budgeted, contracted with a PAF and a TMRF. This is all required basically because anybody who attends an officially sponsored ACM events has to be covered by their insurance. So our logistics vendors would, if we asked them to cover those events, that would greatly increase their costs, which of course we would end up paying too. There'd be a lot of volunteer effort there in terms of organizing all of those. We're also concerned about the already existing regional conferences like Nordic-Chi and OzChi and what the implications would be for their activities. But the idea, which was interesting, and people will mention, well, like, we didn't say Chi 2022 do this, and that's absolutely fair, right? Anybody can self-organize these. And so what we've done, a volunteer came forward actually in the last meeting, and we're working with her. We're going to create a guidebook for people who want to create watch parties for themselves, which would basically be like either events before, after the conference, or during. So maybe, for instance, here in Detroit, there's a bunch of people in the region. We want to get together, anybody who's attending the online conference, and just do an event. So we're kind of watching the online conference or participating in the online conference together in a small regional meeting. Also, all the content for the conference, except the things that are happening live, will be freely available before the conference happens. So people could arrange watch parties for that outside of the traditional kind of set of times that we have available for the conference. So that's what we're working on, is kind of a guidebook for help and how to self-organize this, arranging from all the way to, if you do want to set up a official event, how you would kind of quickly go through that PAF and TMRF process, all the way, or to just, if you want to self-organize this at your local university or local workplace, how to do that. So Liz Warwick is kindly volunteered to put that together, and she's working on it. So where do we go from here? We keep tracking data, seeing where the numbers go. Early indication looks good in terms of where we'll be in May. Looking at we look at other conferences, sister SIGs, things like that, to see what kinds of experiences are they having and what recommendations are they making to their members. We keep listening to our members. As you all know, I love Chi Meta. I am the only person, in fact, who loves Chi Meta, so I'm always there and willing to talk and listen. Same with Twitter. So keep listening, keep sharing ideas and hearing new ideas. Really commit to this no second class experiences. Now that we have the platform picked and can really dive in, we're really sandboxing that, and our accessibility chairs are going to be in there first thing, making sure that that everything's accessible, and then we have experience chairs who are going to go in and just make sure that we're trying to have these meaningful engagement events. Really, I think the thing that we most miss with the online experience is the social stuff, right? It's the networking and getting together. That's where I feel most online conferences have really kind of not achieved as much as they could. So that's what I'm really going to focus on over the next few months, is how to make that experience great. And then the other thing we want to really do is try to make clear that we're rendering under to the Chi steering committee that which is theirs. There's lots of plans for how to change Chi in the future, and individually we agree with some of those we don't. But a lot of those are going to go to the Chi steering committee, because they're the ones who are in charge of kind of thinking about what's the Chi conference look like over the next X years. Whereas our job is just to deliver all of you the best Chi 2022 that we can. So that's my spiel. With that, I'll stop sharing so we can see each other's faces a little bit more easily.
Thank you.
And yeah, thanks.
Is the audio working? Can you hear me, Cliff?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, because my headphones just died on me.
Oh.
All right, so just about the protocol first, if you could raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, we'll go to the raised hands first, and then we'll check on Slido. And if there are any other questions in the chat, then we'll cycle through those as well. So I want to just first say that many people have said thank you, and also thank you from the EC to the CHI 22 team, to Simone and Cliff to work on contributing to make CHI a hybrid event in the future, starting this with 2022. And also Koji had a message saying, thank you for organizing the town hall. I really appreciate that the CHI executive and organizing team are really trying to be transparent. So thank you once again. In terms of going over the questions from the Slido while we wait for raised hands, I want to just maybe ask you to address this question that was upvoted the most on Friday. It sort of feels like in-person is imminent, taking aside extreme scenarios, what would need to happen for the in-person option to be off the table? So let's get started with that, and then we'll go to Jennifer Road.
Yeah, I think the main thing, of course, would be a change in infection rates, or if they're like the Lambda variant. I'm scared to even say Lambda variant because it'll become true. It's kind of like saying Bloody Mary in a mirror. If a Lambda variant comes out, or if there's a change in the infection rates or anything like that in the actual safety of our members, we would definitely reconsider then. If there's a change in our financial situation, such that force majeure clauses in any way get triggered, we'd take a pause and look then. If new data comes to light in general, definitely, we talk about this pretty much on a weekly basis as the organizing team. And then I know all of our other members of our organizing committee also think about this in terms of their own venues and responsibilities. So it's something we're always considering. Nobody here is on kind of a predetermined path that's not at all changeable. We're considering all the time.
Thank you, Cliff. And Jennifer, would you like to go next?
Yes, I have two questions, but I want to clarify that I'm asking them in my personal capacity and not as my capacity of chair of Access SIGCHI. And I just want to contextualize something. I have spent the last 2 years of my life inside because my doctors, thanks to lupus and cancer, which thankfully I'm recovering from, won't let me leave the house. I'm not attending work, and my doctor has recommended that I do not go back into the office for the next year. That said, if a face-to-face CHI happens, I would be showing up in person with a full face respirator over the recommendations of my doctors, with the understanding that if I got sick, it would probably kill me. And the reason I would do this, Cliff and Miha and colleagues, is that the paper that I've submitted to CHI, if it gets through the submission process, I feel is too controversial to submit and then not be there for the social conversations, not be there for the bar conversations and the inevitable fights that we have about it. And I want to emphasize that you are putting people in a situation where they're going to have that pressure on them. And I question the ethics of that in my personal capacity. Because of the, so that's my contextualization, because of the risk involved. I have heard that the city of New Orleans is mandating vaccines and masks. I have heard you say that the CDC or whoever the governmental people that require flying are requiring vaccines to get into the country. And I respect all of that, but what are we doing to make sure that that doesn't change at the last minute, and that we don't get people like me who have made a decision? It's one thing for me to show up in my full face respirator around people that are vaccinated and masked, but the risk level would go up exponentially for me if New Orleans was to, drop the vaccine requirement the week before we get on the airplane or something. And so, how are we going to have transparency? Because we had a policy for Chi 2020, and I say this with love, I adore you guys. I've been going to Chi since I was 20. But we had a policy about masks and social distancing and vaccines. And rather than telling the community that ACM was dropping, was telling us we couldn't have the policy, the blog post just was disappeared. You didn't announce to the community that the rules might change. And, people made commitments to Chi with the understanding that, masks and vaccines were happening. I was asked to review papers for a conference that, I might not be able to attend in person. So how are we going to make sure that the transparency is better going forward, so that if things change, as things change, that we communicate them, realizing that there is a legitimate risk of life to some of our attendees, and that we can't just silence a blog post and take it down. We have to be transparent and say, guys, this is what the game of play is. And I'm sorry, that's a hard question, and I have one other one when it's my turn again. I'll let you answer that one first. Thank you very much. You have my utmost respect, and I know that it's a thankless job.
Well, no, those are two great questions, actually, and I really appreciate them. In the first one, I think you're right that it's too simple to just say, well, there's an online version and that creates equity, right? Because there's going to be an implicit pressure to attend the in-person conference for as long as we think the in-person conference is better and more meaningful than the online conference, which it still is, of course, for most folks. So yeah, that's one of my biggest concerns is this.
Especially when the online conference isn't fully accessible. I could not last year participate in any of the synchronous conversations because of the intersection between my vision and the being online. So we have an extra disparity for some disabled folks, and that the online conference isn't as accessible either. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's a good reminder about how accessibility is tied into all of those kinds of inequities as well. So I agree, and I don't have a good answer for how we're going to mitigate that. Like I said, the thing I'm leaning maybe overly much on is trying to make that online experience as good as possible and having lots of ways to make them accessible. But it's still not totally equitable. And you're right about that, right? It is putting people at risk. And then, I think it's up to the community for us to think about, again, what is that ethical line? So I'm happy to listen to that. That's where I'm listening more than anything. The second one being about the transparency, that's a really good point. I had hoped that the ACM would come back to me with a slightly faster answer, so I wouldn't have to have that blog post down for long, but they haven't. And Sade tells me that we're probably a little ways away still from having a consistent answer from the ACM. So that also does create that additional risk that things, could change drastically in February, and suddenly, we'd be in a situation where New Orleans doesn't have these mandates anymore. My goal is to require for the conference, independent of what New Orleans is doing, the mask mandate and the vaccination mandate. So that's the goal. I have to figure out how to do that with the ACM, and I don't have a good answer for you yet on that, because it's that's where I'm really bound by those rules, and have to think about what that's going to look like. In terms of the transparency, I'm trying not to just promise to do better. I'm trying to think about actual systems that can be in place for us to do better. So
why didn't you put up a post saying, the ACM has asked us to take down the post? I mean, that would be transparent and honest. And,
yeah, I should have.
I feel like a real bitch calling you out, Cliff, but
no,
I'm
please.
just trying to give you a suggestion on how to go forward, going better, and because we want to work together.
No, I agree, and yeah, that was a mistake for sure, and I feel bad about that. We will again, I'm trying to think about systems as opposed to promises. What I'll probably do is when things like that get taken down, or think about the communication strategy, I'm going to turn more to some of my other teammates as well to hold me accountable for some of those things, to make sure that's not just me who's making that. I mean, it's not just me who makes any of these decisions for sure, but like there's more of us looking at kind of that communication pattern to make sure that we're being fully transparent.
Thank you. So Jennifer, we'll come back to you. Maybe I'll take a question from Saito for now. So this is a heavily upvoted question, and maybe you could talk about the virtual platforms in general, because I think there was a question we didn't get to on Friday. So the online experience of CHI 2021 had issues with bandwidth, usability, missing wrong automatic captions. How will a better experience be achieved? And I think there was also a question that said, what systems are going to, what platforms should be used? So could you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, and Simone, Caroline, and Kata, I'll jump in on me on this one if you feel like you want to add anything to this anytime. So we have spent a good bit of time over the past 6-8 weeks looking at different online platforms, trying to experience them live at other conferences that are using them, iterative meetings with the software companies themselves. I hope none of you are involved in software sales, but software salespeople lie, right? And so, you know, they will tell us and assure us that a platform has X feature and Y feature, when sometimes either that promise is more aspirational than realistic, and sometimes it's you know, where our idea of what accessible means is different than their idea. So we've been really, especially given all of our experiences, all of the online conferences that I think we've all had for the past 2 years, have really tried to drive a lot of questions. Kata, for instance, has had a great question, which is something SIG Access has really been trying to dive into and agrees there's no great solution for, which is support for content producers and presenters, right? Even for the platforms that sometimes get it right for attendees of conferences or viewers, they still don't have great accessibility support, for instance, for like the people who are actually producing the content and presenting it. So, you know, we've been asking these questions of all of the different vendors that we're going to. You know, one option that we try, but always is never a great option, is to put in, you know, punitive contract clauses such that if they don't meet X or Y criteria, that they don't get paid as much, but those are really hard to trigger and really hard to litigate. So it's mostly been a matter of experiences. So now we have a platform picked. So, and we know that platform is going to not be perfect, right, in terms of everything that we need for that no second class experiences goal. What we're going to do next is really go in there. I hope that we create personas and go in and just kind of walk through the conference in different ways to really see what that experience is going to look like for different folks. And then we plaster basically the holes in the platform with other experiences. So we plan to use other systems, like Discord was a really important platform that the EC made available for members, and we're going to try to leverage that as much as possible since there's already a big accumulation of members there. We've been talking about how do we create more asynchronous community interaction leading up to the conference as part of the overall experience, which is also easier because it enables more kind of build up and run up to the conference. We're looking at, you know, if there's, for instance, a system that we can put in place, as long as it's accessible, that bridges a particular type of experience at the conference, we'll think about that, right? We've been roughly dividing the experience of the conference into kind of interactive sessions and presentation sessions. It's a false dichotomy, right? It's really more of a spectrum, and there's lots of interaction through questions and such, and paper sessions even. But you know, trying to really think venue by venue, right? What are the needs of the doctoral consortium that are different than the needs of papers presentations, that are different than the needs of interactivity, that, you know, so thinking and really kind of pushing our venue chairs to think creatively and wholeheartedly about what's the experience they're trying to create for their venue. That was long-winded, sorry.
Thank you. From the chat, I want to say that Kata had a comment. I want to thank Jennifer for being so open and vulnerable in sharing personal thoughts and the impact of communication on their decision-making.
Samesies.
And yes, I echo that as well. And going back now to the SIDO maybe, and then we'll come back to you, Jen. So this is another upvoted question. Plans to attend in person might suddenly change, testing positive, borders suddenly close. Are you thinking of ways to flip attendance in certain cases?
Yeah, we will have to, right? Like we don't have a bulletproof process worked out yet. In terms of pricing models, we'll probably follow CHI 2021's excellent pricing model and all the work that I know Aaron put into thinking about what that should be to cover online attendance and everything. And then for the in-person event, we'll probably follow 2019's actually the in-person CHI event pricing model is based off the steering committee mandate as opposed to like an individual conference year choice. And that number hasn't changed for 10, 12 years, I don't think, that pricing model. So, but can you flip between the two of them? Yes, you'll be able to, that's for sure.
Okay. Thank you. And Jen, would you like to ask your next question?
Yes, and my next question I am asking on behalf of Access SIGCHI. So one of the things that we raised in our petition is the global inequity with regards to vaccine rate. We have a lot of countries in the world who haven't gotten their first doses, and you know, having an event like CHI increases, you know, people's, it sort of turns the global cesspool of COVID, right? And in ways that redistributes and brings it back out to countries that might not have vaccine access. And bearing in mind that we do have, you know, children under 12 that aren't vaccinated in the West, and, you know, immunocompromised people who still aren't meant to be leaving their homes in many instances. So I'm hearing from CHI 2022 that we are committed to an online event, but as somebody who's in the position of fearlessly, perhaps recklessly, and perhaps irritatingly advocating for the minority, I'm hearing us say that we're putting our needs as privileged academics ahead of the global South, children, and the immunocompromised. And I'm not comfortable with that personally. But it seems like a decision that has been made. And so my extraordinarily difficult question is, what are we as a community going to try to do to try to redress the inequities that having this conference is creating? So for instance, when we fly, we you know, can pay for carbon offsets. You know, are we thinking about, you know, since I'm no longer going to get any traction on canceling the face-to-face conference, what are we going to do to, you know, try to redress vaccine access to the countries that were impacted by having what could potentially, you know, be more churning in the COVID in the COVID cesspool? I hope that question is understandable, and I know it's a hard question, and I don't actually expect you to have an answer to it, Cliff, right now, but I would really love to hear some commitment that we try to think through some sort of, you know, carbon offset type, COVID offset type plan for CHI to try to at least mitigate something. Thank you. I'm babbling because I'm nervous.
I really like the idea of a COVID offset plan. Like that's something we hadn't thought about before, and that's a really cool idea. I'm going to see more about that. Yeah, so that's a rich question, and there's a lot that goes into it, right? So you're right, that sustainability issues have been kind of on the mind for a number of years. Matt Jones has been kind of a tireless advocate on the steering committee for thinking about these issues for quite a while. And that's one of the render unto steering committee. But as you know, somebody who's been on the steering committee for a long time, I've got a couple of thoughts there just personally. One of which is, you know, our plan here had been to move the conference around the world and to increase equity by moving the conference to different locations year by year. I think the problem with that is that's kind of too long-term a perspective for how people think about the conference, right? Like it's that might work in the long tail aggregate or may not, but it doesn't feel quite like enough, right, on a year-to-year basis. So that strategy that the steering committee has always had is to move the conference around in this pattern. We have to think about whether that's really meeting the goals that we've had. The equity issues, and especially the Global South and equity issues, are really key and important here. And it's not like the pandemic created our layers of inequity that we have with the Global South, right? We've had those for a long time, as Simone might have more to say coming from as a researcher in Brazil. So the way we've dealt with that in the past, I think also has had some successes, but not really been successful in the way we wanted it to, right? The way we have typically dealt with this at CHI traditionally has been to try to underwrite attendance from the Global South at the conference in a variety of ways. That we should continue doing that. That's been a successful thing in some ways, but it's not 100% successful, right? In that I don't feel like it's really grown those communities as folks in the way that we had hoped. And we see this both in South America and Africa, Middle East, North Africa, the whole 9 yards. So the other thing that we'd like to see is, I think, more regional conferences. And that's, I know maybe Matt now as chapters chair is thinking about what that looks like. We do like the idea of, or I shouldn't say we, I like the idea of these regional conferences and what those might look like. So I think sketching those out, and Kata reminded me earlier that our sustainability chairs for CHI 2022 have been really already thinking about this. So it's not like it was a brand new idea, but I dropped the ball in following up with them. And then in terms of like, how do we make these decisions and how do you go forward knowing that you're basically screwing over a big chunk of the world? Yeah, that is the tough question, right? Like it is, something I'm not going to claim to be right about for sure. And something that we think about a lot. So that's what we're here to listen to.
Thank you, Cliff. I want to just pause and ask if any of the other members of the executive team would like to add to anything that's been said so far.
Yes, Simone, do you want to address that one in particular?
So I could say that, thank you, Cliff. I could say that for a long time, there's been inequity in the Global South. I mean, I don't think that the pandemic is going to make it much, much worse in terms of the percentage of attendees coming from regions such as Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. Traditionally, we've had, below 2% of the attendees. This year, we had 2.2% from those regions. But in Denver, for instance, in 2017, we had 2.4% of attendees from those regions. So I think that one great contribution for this year's also uptick in the attendance was the great support from the Gary Marsden Travel Awards, which dropped some of the restrictions and supported many more attendees from those regions to attend virtually. So I think that if we can support them and have like this minimal registration fees for those, that will be, a great, I wouldn't say equalizer, but it would be a great contribution for people in the region. And of course, we do have language issues that, are unsurmountable. I mean, many people from Latin America, I know they would wish to attend, but they say, I don't really understand anything. So it's hard for us for many of us to actually, be there and participate in discussions, especially.
Thank
The other
you.
thing I want to mention really quickly that we've done to increase equity is we have this web exclusive event that's occurring a couple of weeks before the conference. I think that's been sometimes mistaken as our online component of the conference. No, the online component is occurring synchronously with the conference event itself. The web exclusive event is a practically free, like event that people can go to. That's just going to be like a sampling of content from Kai. So that should be able to reach a really broad audience, because it removes even kind of the registration barriers we currently have for our online content, which, you know, our online programming is cheaper than our offline programming, but it's still way out of bounds for a lot of the global South. So this web exclusive event will be at a price point that we think like could be much more accessible by a lot of folks in the global South, and will be, you know, keynote, a couple of panels, paper sessions, things like that, that people can experience. And that'll be an opt-in. The content producers will opt into that web experience to kind of get their word out, and well, that'll be structured in a kind of a fun, you know, open way.
Thank you, Cliff. And we'll come back to your raised hand, Lionel. There's just two questions that are related that have both been upvoted. So I'll mention both together. The first one says, people in privileged positions are likely to attend in person and not virtually. How will other/junior scholars find opportunities to network with them? And related to that, the next question says, don't regional events increase segregation in the community, making it harder for some to get in touch with the HCI rock stars and easy for those who are close? So I guess both questions are asking about the opportunities for junior scholars to work to get in touch with HCI quote unquote rock stars. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, in terms of the regional conferences, I think that's a really good point, right? What you don't want to create is kind of the real Kai at North American Conference or Europe or wherever it happens to be, or Germany. Like Germany is the real Kai and everybody else is kind of just chasing the tail. And then creating inequity then between the regions and everything. So that'll have to be really carefully planned about how we do that. The Distinguished Speakers Series might be a way to manage that, but that'll take more planning. What was the first question again? Sorry.
It was about how people in privileged positions are likely to attend in person and not virtually. So how will other/junior scholars find opportunities to network with them?
So this, I think, is going to be a mix of asynchronous and synchronous interactions, right? So I don't know if we were just lucky or whatever, but I happen to be an online communities researcher, and that's actually my bag within Kai. So we're really trying to focus on, especially once we started getting content out there and people can interact around content, how do we create experiences around those content in a lightweight way that doesn't feel like you're attending Kai for 6 months, to you know, experience that content and have like some conversations around it, right? Like one of the things I worry about is we don't want Kai to feel like, oh my God, I've been at Kai for like forever. I feel like I'm stuck in the purgatory of Kai. So trying to create experiences where you actually interact with people through social media, through our Discord channel, around some asynchronous content that occurs before the conference, but then also what do these online experiences look like with especially hybrid experiences, right? So nobody really has cracked the code on what good hybridity looks like. Like I think I can make a decent online experience, and the offline experience, despite some challenges, we kind of know what that looks like. But what does the actual intersection look like? And that's where we want to do a lot more work. I think some of that's going to look like chats around content. I think some of that's going to look like specific proctored events. We're looking at what some of the other conferences done. CSCW is next week, and they've done some really interesting stuff around like kind of mentoring events that I think really work. One of the benefits for being a student volunteer, for instance, has always been these kind of like HCI luminary lunches where they bring in established HCI researchers to talk to SVs. I think we could do that more broadly for the community, for all junior scholars, and try to set up some requests for our senior faculty to make themselves available for some of those synchronous events. The challenge I think we've had with a lot of the online networking is that basically a lot of it has been like, I'm going to create a room, and then in that room, we're going to stare awkwardly at each other. It's like as if you're in a hallway and people pushed 6 random of you into a room, and you're kind of like, what do we talk about? So having some like purpose and meaning behind an interaction, I think, is really important. I loved what Kai 2021 did with the blinners and the dinners and everything. Like actually interacting around food was a huge, I think, social, really nice social moment for the conference, even though it was distant.
Thank you. Lionel, would you like to go next?
Yeah, my name is Lionel Robert. I'm at the University of Michigan. My pronouns are he, him, and his. So I actually like the idea of the regional conferences, except for one problem. Basically, if you get a paper published at CHI versus, let's say, Nordic CHI, which is in Europe and has a good reputation, well, it has a different weight on tenure promotion. So I'm wondering if someone, let's say, could submit and get a paper accepted at CHI, but presented at a regional conference, upload the presentation up, so that it could be available to the participants, at CHI, because that would go a long way to helping scholars who can't afford to routinely go to CHI participate and promote their work in terms of tenure and promotion. Because as you mentioned before, if you get a paper accepted at CHI and the same paper is accepted at Nordic CHI, and even though Nordic CHI is well-established conference, it still tends not to carry the same weight when it comes to tenure promotion.
Yeah, that's a good point. I noted it down because when we talk about these issues with the steering committee, I think that's what we want to think of. If we really want to kind of flesh out what would this look like as kind of like a 3-year conversion of CHI into this plan, I think issues like that definitely need to be on the table.
Thank you. There are some comments that I'll quickly mention because we're running short on time. So there's one that says, very taken with what JR, which I assume stands for Jennifer Road, said about pressures to attend in person and that this might put people at mortal risk. Online only seems more ethically sound, ? And then there's another comment which says, if you want to put equity first, then there will be an infinite loop. There is some kind of inequity in any decision. Let me quickly ask for this. So vaccine makers suggest the pandemic will be over by the end of 2022. Should we not wait until, that over was in double quotes, should we not wait until CHI 2023 for in-person given all of the issues raised by access, etc.?
I think the double quotes there are important, right? The question I've been consistently asking the steering committee and the executive committee is, what will change at this time next year such that we feel comfortable having CHI 2023 in Germany, right? Like, what are the operationalized what are the numbers we're looking for? What are the changes we're looking for in terms of things? And there are reasonably things that are there, right? Like, you could think about global vaccination rates, you could think about global cases and everything like that. I think, yeah, the most conservative and safest mode would be to cancel the in-person event and just to move forward with the online event. Given all the range of considerations, we're still planning the in-person event, given financial commitments, given the fact, partially for me, I feel like we just need to figure out what hybrid is. We need to start that process of figuring out what good hybrid conferences look like, because if we keep putting that decision off, we're never going to get there, right? We're going to exacerbate inequity by never figuring out what we want from our online experiences.
Vanessa, would you like to go next?
Oh, hi. Thanks. I just want to say, so I'm a little bit of an outsider in this. I'm actually an astronomer. I know Aaron actually pretty well. My context here, so I've attended a SIGGRAPH and a SIGGRAPH Asia, and I work in a space like in remote training that I'm interested in human-computer interaction, but I'm not in human-computer interaction. And I'm sorry, I violated all your rules about introducing myself. I'm Vanessa. I'm based at CSIRO in Sydney in Australia. And she, her, what were the other things I should mention? Sorry.
That's great.
Okay,
thank you.
So what I wanted to mention was, firstly, I've been kind of half watching and being really interested in the conversation. I think it's great that as a community you're having it. I think it's awesome that, accessibility is such a high priority. In astronomy, we are having similar conversations, but I think, at the moment, removing in person isn't even on the table, right? So there's just an implicit assumption that obviously we'll go back to in person at some level once it's available. But actually, I think reconsidering what is the role of in-person interaction and who is missing out and how do we make our scientific communities fairer is really important. So I just want to say that's great. And I think it would be great that this is such a topic that crosses across scientific disciplines. So in astronomy, we would love to talk to CHI and SIGGRAPH and ACM more about how we can learn from each other and the kinds of things that are going on. In terms of some of the comments that were raised earlier, so, the second class citizens thing is it's real. Most virtual or even hybrid conferences don't try to blend that, make the online people have the same experience. So in the future of meetings, which is how Aaron and I cross paths, we ran a symposium last year about this topic and how we can do better online meetings. We concluded digital first, and I guess we'd be happy to chat to you guys sometime separately about this, if that's helpful. But it was basically, you sort of design it with digital first in mind, and then, the hubs form around that, or the in-person forms around that, and you sort of try to level the playing fields. And we're still trying, we've never seen really a good hybrid, so I think it's a noble quest to go down. But yeah, it's definitely something that I guess will have to be solved. One of the conversations we're having in astronomy is, do you use the in-person for the stuff it's good for, which is not content delivery, but the social interactions? But then you still have to deal with the inaccessibility of who's excluded from that. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that it's really great and keen to talk more.
Thank you, Vanessa. We're running super short on time, but Aaron, if you have a quick comment or question, would you like to just
Sure.
be our last speaker? Yeah.
I'm Aaron Quigley from the University of New South Wales in Sydney. I'm calling from Gallagher land. My pronouns are he, him. I'm one of the last year's chairs from CHI 2021. I just wanted to echo what Vanessa said in terms of having a digital first experience. And I would just like to call out what the Global Communities Diversity and Inclusion chairs did last year, specifically around the Blinners, but also the mentor circles, the allyship work, and the diversity chats that they actually brought in, and making that part of the way to bring people in digital first as a way to deliver a hybrid conference experience, and then to basically create those networks that will live on beyond the conference event itself. And I wish the 2022 chairs very well in creating a digital first hybrid experience.
Thank you, Aaron.
I put a circle around digital first on my paper.
Anything that you would like to close with, Cliff and Simone, or any of the other CHI 22 team members?
No, I mean, I'm super glad we had this meeting. I'm happy to wake up at 6 a.m. given how often Caroline and Kata in our meetings have been like late in the day for our meetings. So it feels just like the tiniest bit of justice for them. So I appreciate that opportunity. And thanks everybody for sharing their thoughts. And we'll keep listening, right? My phone number is on CHI Meta. So if you really want to talk about it, I'm always available.
Thank you so much. There's still
Cliff's phone number. You don't have to join Facebook. That was not.
Sorry, Kata. I just wanted to say there are a couple of questions that we didn't get to, and I'll just share them with you later if you want to address them in some other way. But thank you everybody for attending, and we're just a couple of minutes over, but we'll close now. Thanks a lot. And we will be sharing a video of this online soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.